I stood alone at my son's grave, the soil still fresh, the silence cutting through me like glass. While I buried my 11-year-old, my parents raised champagne flutes at my sister's engagement dinner. Then, as I tried to breathe through the grief, my phone buzzed. A message from Mom. Stop being dramatic. Give $120,000 to buy Regina an apartment. They weren't just absent from the funeral, they wanted my dead child's trust fund. I thought losing my son was the worst pain imaginable. I was wrong. What came next tore apart every illusion I had about family. I'm Madeline Carter, and this is my story. I'm 36 years old, a senior financial analyst in Chicago, and for a long time I thought I had built a good, steady life. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I earned about $95,000 a year, I had a small house on the north side, and most importantly, I had my son Daniel. He was 11, full of energy, always running from one thing to the next. He was my whole world. My family used to say we were close, but in truth, we were close only when it benefited them. My parents are in their 60s. They still live in the same suburban house where I grew up. And then there's my younger sister Regina. She's 30, the baby of the family, and she's been treated like royalty her entire life. Every choice she makes, every mistake, every expensive whim has been cushioned by my parents. And by me. When I divorced Daniel's father, Mark, 6 years ago, I felt grateful because my family stepped in. They babysat when I had to work late. Regina even helped Daniel with homework sometimes. It made me feel like we were all in this together. In return, I tried to give back more than I had to. I paid $1,800 every month toward my parents' mortgage. I sent $800 each month to Regina so she could keep her apartment. When she went back to college for her master's degree, I wrote a check for $15,000 without even blinking. I told myself that's what families do. But over time, I noticed something. The help I gave was never enough to earn real respect. If Regina got a new job, the whole family gathered to celebrate. If David, her boyfriend, brought her flowers, my mother posted about it on Facebook. When I got a promotion at work, silence. Not even a text. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. I had Daniel. I had my career. I could carry a little extra weight if it meant keeping everyone happy. Regina's relationship with David made everything worse. He came from money, old European money, and my parents were dazzled. They spent dinners planning Regina's engagement, talking about venues, rings, honeymoon destinations. Meanwhile, I was juggling bills, trying to keep Daniel happy, and making sure everyone else in the family was supported. I remember one Sunday dinner months before everything happened. My father poured David a glass of wine and said, "You're the future of this family." I laughed awkwardly, but inside it stung. What about me? What about Daniel? My mother quickly changed the subject to Regina's dress shopping as if I wasn't even sitting at the table. That was the first crack I felt like the ground shifting just slightly under my feet. There were other cracks. Little comments, things my parents said that I brushed aside at the time. Mom telling me don't spoil Daniel too much, he doesn't need everything handed to him. Dad reminding me Regina's still young, she deserves some help while she gets on her feet. I accepted those words as normal, but looking back now, they were signs of where their loyalty really stood. I don't want you to think I lived in bitterness. I didn't. I loved my son. I loved our quiet routines. Daniel would come home from school, throw his backpack on the floor, and shout, "Mom, guess what happened today?" He'd tell me about some science experiment or a funny thing a kid said in class. We would eat dinner together, just the two of us, and then he'd curl up next to me on the couch, still in his baseball uniform, smelling like grass and sweat. Those were the moments I lived for. Mark and I, even though we were divorced, kept things civil. He paid child support. He picked Daniel up every other weekend. He came to baseball games and clapped louder than anyone. Sometimes I thought maybe if we hadn't rushed into marriage so young, things would have turned out differently. But I didn't regret anything because it gave me Daniel. If I'm being honest, there was always a tension inside me, a split between the life I built with my son and the obligations I felt to my family. Every month when I transferred money for the mortgage and for Regina's rent, I felt the knot in my chest tighten, but I didn't stop. I didn't want to be the selfish one. And then life began to shift in a way I couldn't control. It started small. Daniel came home tired more often. He'd flop on the couch and say, "Mom, I don't feel like practice today." I thought maybe it was just growing pains. Maybe the school year was catching up with him. But in the back of my mind, I worried. Mothers always know when something is wrong. I told myself I'd watch it, keep an eye out. I didn't know yet that we were standing on the edge of something that would rip every illusion I had about family wide open. It started with the tiredness. At first, I thought it was just school. Daniel had always been the kind of kid who never sat still. He'd race down the block on his bike, challenge the neighbors' kids to baseball games until the sun went down, and still have energy to talk my ear off at bedtime. So when he began lying on the couch after school quiet and pale, I told myself it was a growth spurt. Then came the bruises. They didn't make sense. Small purple marks on his arms, his legs. I asked him if he'd been roughhousing at recess. He shrugged. "I don't remember, Mom." When the bruises didn't fade, a knot formed in my stomach. I made an appointment with Dr. Martinez, our pediatrician. The office smelled like disinfectant and crayon wax from the waiting room. Daniel sat swinging his feet off the exam table, still joking with the nurse, while I filled out forms with clammy hands. Dr. Martinez looked calm, as always, but his tone shifted after the blood draw. "We'll call you when we have results," he said. I smiled, pretending I wasn't worried, but my palms were damp. The call came 2 days later, Tuesday afternoon. I was at work, staring at numbers on a screen that suddenly meant nothing. "Miss Carter, can you come in today to discuss Daniel's results?" Dr. Martinez's voice was careful too. Careful. My chest went tight. I drove to the clinic in a haze, rehearsing all the ordinary things it could be. Anemia, vitamin deficiency. Kids get those right. When I walked into the office, Dr. Martinez didn't waste time. His white blood cell count is extremely elevated. "We need to rule out leukemia. I've already called Children's Hospital. They'll see you tomorrow." Leukemia. The word hit like a freight train. I gripped the chair arms, trying to process it. My son might have cancer. That evening, I picked Daniel up from school, plastering on a smile. He bounced into the car, talking about a group project. I nodded, my throat dry, praying he wouldn't notice my hands trembling on the wheel. After he went to bed, I called Mark. He drove over immediately. When I told him what the doctor said, his face drained of color. He sat down hard on the couch, shaking his head. No. He's fine. He has to be fine." His voice cracked, and I realized how fragile both of us really were. I called my parents too. Mom's response: "Oh, honey, don't worry. Kids get sick all the time." Dad mumbled something about staying positive. Regina answered distractedly. David was talking in the background about dinner reservations. Their distance stung, but I tried not to dwell on it. Maybe they didn't understand yet. The next day, the hospital confirmed it: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Aggressive. He needed immediate treatment. I remember the sterile hallway, the machines beeping, the smell of antiseptic. Daniel looked so small in the hospital bed, ivory tubes taped to his arm, yet he was the one comforting me. "Mom, don't cry. We're a team." He smiled weakly. Mark and I became a unit again, staying by Daniel's side. We took turns sleeping in the stiff hospital chairs. I'd read to him from his favorite books. On good days, he'd draw pictures for the nurses. On bad days, he'd close his eyes and squeeze my hand until the nausea passed. Dr. Chin, the oncologist, was straightforward. "He's responding, but leukemia can be unpredictable. We must stay vigilant." I nodded, memorizing every word. During those months, I lived between the office and the hospital. I barely saw daylight. The only thing that kept me moving was Daniel's quiet bravery. Even when the chemo made him sick, he whispered thank you to the nurses. And where was my family? Calls came now and then, but the conversations always slid back to Regina. Mom would ask how Daniel was doing, then launch into updates about wedding venues or David's parents' visit from London. Once, while I stood outside Daniel's hospital room holding back tears, Regina texted me a photo of her engagement ring. "Isn't it gorgeous? David's parents helped pick it out." I wanted to throw my phone against the wall. Instead, I put it away and went back inside to hold Daniel's hand. The contrast was impossible to ignore. My son was fighting for his life, and my parents were gushing over floral arrangements. Sometimes at night, sitting in the dim hospital room with only the monitors glowing, I'd remember being a kid myself. I remembered having a fever at 12, lying in bed while Mom rushed out with Regina to some recital. Dad left me with a glass of water and said, "You'll be fine." Back then, I told myself they just didn't realize how sick I was. Now with Daniel, I understood this was a pattern. Regina was always first. Mark noticed it too. One evening after a long day at the hospital, he said, "Your parents, they should be here. Why aren't they?" His voice carried anger, but I could see the sadness behind it. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't want to admit the truth that maybe they simply didn't care enough. Still, I kept trying. I invited them to visit Daniel. Mom said she'd come when things settled down with the engagement. Regina said she was too stressed with planning. Dad avoided the subject. The hospital became my entire world. The beeping of monitors was my alarm clock. The smell of antiseptic clung to my clothes. Every day was a mix of small hopes and crushing fears, and through it all, my parents' distance grew louder in my head. I thought the worst thing I could face was watching my son suffer. But there was another weight pressing in the realization that the people I counted on most were already choosing someone else. And deep down, though I tried to silence it, a question grew: if the worst happened to Daniel, would my parents even show up? The call came on a Thursday morning. I was at my desk at work reviewing numbers that blurred together when my phone buzzed. It was the hospital. I answered quickly, already feeling that twist in my stomach. Miss Carter, the nurse, said, her voice tight. "You need to come right away." My throat went dry. "Is Daniel okay?" She hesitated. "Dr. Chen will explain everything when you arrive. Please, just come quickly." The drive to the hospital felt endless. Stoplights turned red at the worst moments. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I kept repeating in my head, "It's just a setback, an infection, they'll fix it." Children bounce back. When I reached the hospital, Dr. Chen was waiting. His expression said everything. He led me into a consultation room, his voice low. "Madeline Daniel's condition has deteriorated rapidly. His body isn't responding to treatment anymore. His organs are beginning to fail. I'm so sorry, but there's nothing more we can do. It's a matter of hours." The words floated in the air like smoke. I couldn't grasp them. "No," I said, shaking my head. "There has to be something else. Another drug, another trial." "I wish there was," Dr. Chen replied softly. "Would you like me to call his father?" I nodded because I couldn't speak. Mark arrived within half an hour. He rushed in, his face ashen, and when he saw me, he didn't ask questions. He just sat down beside me and reached for my hand. We walked together to Daniel's room. Daniel was awake, but weak. His skin looked too pale against the white sheets. Machines beeped steadily beside him. He looked at both of us, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Mom, Dad." We sat on either side of the bed, each holding one of his hands. Mark read aloud from one of Daniel's favorite books. He didn't even get through the first chapter. His voice broke, and I took over, though my eyes blurred with tears. The hours crawled by. Nurses came in quietly, adjusting tubes, checking monitors, speaking in hushed voices. Time no longer felt real. At 6:47 p.m., Daniel looked at us and whispered, "I love you." Then the monitor flatlined. My world stopped. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I just sat there frozen, holding his hand, feeling it grow colder. I wanted to rewind time, to trade places, to do anything except sit in that moment. Mark sobbed openly, his body shaking. He kissed Daniel's forehead, whispering, "My boy, my boy." I stayed still, my body numb, as if movement would confirm what had just happened. Afterward, they asked if we wanted more time in the room. I couldn't answer, so Mark spoke for us. "Yes." We sat there for another hour, silent except for our breathing. When we finally left the hospital that night, I felt hollow. The city outside looked the same, cars, honking lights glowing, but everything had changed. That night, I dialed my parents. Mark was beside me, urging me to let them know. Mom answered, her voice bright. I told her Daniel was gone. She paused, then said, "Oh, honey, I'm sorry, but we're out at dinner right now. I can't talk about sad things tonight." I stared at the phone. "He died," I whispered. "I know," she replied quickly, "but it's too heavy to talk about right now." And then she excused herself. Regina answered Mark's call, her voice flat. "I can't deal with this tonight. I have enough stress with the engagement party." She hung up. That was it. My son had just died, and the people who should have been my anchor couldn't even pause their celebrations to acknowledge him. The next day was a blur. Funeral homes, casket choices, obituary drafts. I had never thought about these things for a child. Mark and I moved mechanically through the motions. He handled the calls because I couldn't form sentences. He called Daniel's school his baseball coach extended family. Meanwhile, my parents didn't call again until the following evening. Mom's tone was polished like she was practicing sympathy. "Scarlett, we feel so terrible about Daniel," she said. "It's Madeline," I corrected softly. "Yes, Madeline," she said. "Anyway, we won't be able to help with the funeral planning. Regina's engagement party is this weekend, and David's parents are only here from London for a short time. This is the only chance to have the celebration." I gripped the phone, my voice shaking. "My son just died. His funeral is in 2 days." Mom's voice turned sharp. "Regina has been planning this for months. Don't be selfish." Life has to go on. Selfish. That word echoed in my head. My son was gone, and she thought I was selfish for wanting them at his funeral. On Friday, the day of the service, the sky was gray and cold. Mark drove me because I didn't trust myself behind the wheel. The funeral home filled with people, Mark's family, Daniel's teachers, his classmates, even neighbors. People who had known my son, who wanted to honor him. I kept glancing at the back of the room, waiting for my parents. For Regina. They never came, Aunt Linda noticed. She whispered, "Where are they?" "They said they might not make it," I admitted. Her face hardened. She stepped outside and made a call. When she returned, her expression was furious. "They're at the engagement party, right now, celebrating." I felt like I'd been punched. During the service, as I spoke about Daniel's kindness, his laughter, his courage, my parents were raising glasses of champagne downtown. The service itself was beautiful. Daniel's teacher shared a story about him helping classmates. His baseball coach spoke about his determination. Mark cried through his entire eulogy. I spoke too, but I don't remember the words. I just remember clutching Daniel's silver necklace, the one he used to wear every day until my palm hurt. When we buried him, the sound of dirt hitting the casket echoed like a drumbeat. I thought my knees would give out, but Mark held me up. That night, I sat in my silent kitchen. No cartoons on the TV, no baseball mitt tossed on the floor, just silence. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Stop being dramatic. It's better to give $120,000 to buy Regina an apartment." I read it 3 times, thinking I had misunderstood. They weren't at the funeral, but they had no problem demanding my dead child's trust fund. The numbness that had carried me through the last days shifted. Something inside me snapped. I opened my banking app, canceled the monthly transfers to my parents and Regina, and took screenshots. I sent them in a group text with no words. Then I turned off my phone. For the first time in years, I wasn't paying for their lives. And for the first time in days, I felt something other than grief. I felt anger. The morning after Daniel's funeral, I woke to a phone buzzing nonstop on my nightstand. 47 missed calls. Dozens of text messages. My throat was raw from crying, but I made myself get out of bed, pour a cup of coffee, and sit at the kitchen table. Only then did I start scrolling. The messages were a mix of shock, outrage, and guilt. From Dad. "Why did you cancel the transfers? Call us back immediately." From Mom. "We can't afford the mortgage without your help. You know that. Don't be cruel." From Regina. "Are you kidding me? I can't pay rent without you. This is so selfish." Selfish. There it was again. That word they used like a knife. At first, I didn't respond. I let the phone buzz while I drank my coffee, the steam fogging my glasses. The silence in the house was so heavy, it felt like it pressed on my chest. Daniel's backpack was still by the door. His baseball cap still hung on the chair. By noon, the knocking started. Loud, insistent, rattling the door. I looked through the peephole. My parents were on the porch, dressed neatly as if they were visiting a neighbor, not confronting the daughter whose child they had abandoned. Mom clutched a folded paper in her hand like she'd prepared a speech. I opened the door a crack. "How could you do this to us?" Mom snapped before she was even inside. "How could you cut off our money like that?" Dad pushed past me into the living room. "This is completely unacceptable, Madeline. We depend on those payments. You know that." I stared at them, my voice low. "You didn't come to Daniel's funeral." Dad's face tightened. "Of course we're sad about Daniel, but life goes on." People die, Madeline. You can't punish everyone else just because you're grieving. You were at Regina's engagement party while we buried him. Mom's expression hardened. Regina's happiness matters too. She only gets engaged once. David's parents came all the way from London for this. We couldn't disappoint them. Her words hit me like ice water. But you could disappoint me. You're being dramatic, Dad said flatly. We knew this might happen with Daniel's illness. Regina's engagement is a celebration of life, a new beginning. Something in me snapped. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Daniel's necklace. I'd been holding it for days, my fingers sore from gripping the chain. I slammed it down on the table so hard the metal clinked. The sound filled the room. That was your grandson's, I said, my voice shaking. He wore it every day. He loved you, and you weren't there. Not once. Mom's lips trembled, but instead of remorse, anger flashed in her eyes. Regina is alive. She has her whole future ahead of her. We can't drop everything for someone who's already gone. I felt my chest tighten, but I stood taller. Get out of my house. Dad frowned. Don't be ridiculous. We need to talk about this money. Get out, or I'll call the police. For the first time, they looked unsettled. Mom glanced at Dad, but neither moved. Finally, they muttered about how unreasonable I was being and shuffled toward the door. I thought it was over until the phone rang half an hour later. Regina. Against my better judgment, I answered. What the hell is wrong with you? She screamed. How could you cut off my rent money? Do you know what kind of position you've put me in? My voice was low, but steady. You didn't come to your nephew's funeral. I was at my engagement party. It was planned for months. David's parents flew here specifically for it. I'm sorry Daniel died, but I can't put my life on hold because of it. I gripped the phone so tightly my hand hurt. He was your nephew. He loved you. Her voice grew sharper, nastier. You're just jealous. You lost your kid and now you have nothing. You're trying to ruin my happiness because you can't stand to see me have a future. The words cut deep, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of hearing me cry. I hung up, blocked her number. Then I blocked my parents' numbers too. For the first time, silence in the house felt like a shield. In the days that followed, they tried everything. More calls, more texts, emails filled with guilt trips and insults. They even showed up at my office. I told security not to let them in. They didn't stop. They sent relatives to plead on their behalf. But Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert had already chosen sides. They told me what they did is unforgivable. We don't even recognize them anymore. For years, I had been the one who paid the bills who kept my family afloat. I had believed that made me part of them. But standing in my kitchen staring at Daniel's empty chair, I finally understood I had been nothing more than a wallet to them. I kept thinking about the necklace, the way it sounded when it hit the table. That metallic crack still echoed in my head. It was the moment everything shifted. The moment I realized that love without presence, without sacrifice, is just a lie. The house grew quieter, but in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't in months control. It didn't erase the grief. Nothing ever will. But it was the beginning of something else, a boundary, a line that should have been drawn years ago. And even though I had no idea what the future would look like, I knew one thing: they could no longer cross it. In the weeks after I cut them off, my phone was a battlefield. Missed calls, voicemails, emails I never opened. At first, the silence after blocking them felt strange, almost unnatural. I had spent years answering every request, moving money every month, carrying their weight. Now every morning I poured my coffee without the dread of checking my account balance. That silence turned into relief. My extended family rallied around me. Aunt Linda called every few days, not to pry, but just to say, I'm here if you need me. My cousins invited me to Sunday dinners, making sure I didn't eat alone. They brought casseroles, sat with me in my quiet house, told stories about Daniel that I hadn't heard before. For the first time, I realized that support could come from people who didn't demand payment in return. News of what my parents and Regina had done spread quickly through the family. Invitations to Regina's wedding were declined one by one. Cousins, aunts, even some of David's relatives backed out. The wedding ended up being a hollow affair with barely 20 guests. I didn't go, of course. I only heard secondhand from my cousin Sarah, who described it as awkward silence with a fancy dinner. Regina kept asking why people weren't there. My mother told her everyone was busy, but the truth hung in the air unspoken. But heavy people don't celebrate with those who abandon their own blood. I wish I could say that knowledge made me feel better, but honestly, it didn't. The satisfaction was fleeting. What lingered was the emptiness of a house that no longer echoed with Daniel's laughter. Mark was the one who helped fill that silence. We found ourselves spending more time together, not as a couple at first, but as two parents who had lost the same child. We visited Daniel's grave together. We sat on the couch with old photo albums, laughing through tears at his silly drawings. Sometimes in those quiet nights, I saw glimpses of the man I'd fallen in love with years ago. One evening, he showed me a drawing Daniel had made when he was 8. It was a sketch of a giant creature, his version of Bigfoot, complete with spiky hair and long arms. Daniel had sworn he'd seen it on a camping trip. He'd begged us to buy cameras to prove it was real. I laughed through tears, clutching that paper like it was gold. For the first time in months, laughter didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like a piece of Daniel still alive between us. Mark eventually asked if he could move back in. Not like that, he clarified, just so we don't have to sit in different houses missing him alone. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if it was healthy. But my therapist told me, you're both grieving the same loss. Sometimes healing is easier when you don't have to explain yourself, so I said yes. The house changed after that. There was someone to share meals with, someone to talk to when the memories got too heavy. We weren't magically fixed, but the silence wasn't as sharp. 6 months passed. The grief softened around the edges, though it never disappeared. I still had bad days when I saw a boy Daniel's age and had to leave the store, days when I found one of his baseballs in the closet and collapsed on the floor. But I also had days when I could smile at a memory, when I could tell a story about him without breaking apart. My parents tried again to push their way back in. They sent a card on what would have been Daniel's 12th birthday. They tried to show up at my office around Christmas. Regina sent an email saying she regretted her words and wanted to reconcile. I deleted it. I threw the card away. I told security at work to call the police if they ever came again. Some people told me I was being too harsh. Family is family, a coworker said gently. But I had already learned the truth. Family is not defined by blood. Family is who shows up. Family is who sits in the hospital room with you, who holds your hand at the funeral, who remembers your child's smile without needing to be reminded. I no longer had parents in the traditional sense. I no longer had a sister, but I had Mark, who was finding his way back into my life. I had Aunt Linda and my cousins. I had friends who checked in, teachers who still sent me notes about how much Daniel had meant to them. My circle was smaller, but it was real. Mark and I haven't defined what we are yet. We're careful, cautious. He mentioned once quietly the idea of having another child someday. My first reaction was fear. What if I lost another child? What if I couldn't survive it again? But there was also something else in his words, a belief that life could still hold joy. I wasn't ready to answer. Maybe one day I will be. For now, I live one day at a time. I go to work. I water the plants in the kitchen window. I walk through the park where Daniel used to play, and sometimes I imagine I hear his laugh carried by the wind. And every evening when I pass the small wooden box on my dresser that holds his silver necklace, I pause. I touch it gently. That necklace has become more than a keepsake. It's the line between the family that abandoned me and the family I choose now. It reminds me of who Daniel was: kind, brave, grateful, and of what I refuse to accept anymore. I don't know exactly what my future looks like. I don't know if Mark and I will build something new together, but I do know this: I am stronger than I ever thought I could be. I survived losing everything, and I am still here. Because family isn't who demands from you. Family is who stays even in the darkest night. When I look back, I realize the real twist in my story wasn't just losing Daniel. It was discovering who my family truly was and who they weren't. Sometimes the people you expect to stand beside you are the ones who vanish first. And sometimes the circle you build afterward, the friends, the relatives who choose you, the ones who remember your child's laugh, that becomes the family worth keeping. If you've ever felt abandoned by the people you thought you could count on, you're not alone. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments and share if you've faced something similar. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about betrayal survival and the quiet strength it takes to begin again.